Welcome, folks. We have a great interview tonight. We're joined by Wes. He's a softball aficionado. He's a player, physio, and has dealt with so many different aspects of the game. So we just had him on to pick his brain on a few things like how to warm up, how to prepare to play, injury prevention, and a few other bits and pieces like that. So, your journey of going, obviously you've background of watching baseball, playing softball, and now you're working as a physio and a strength coach. How does that all come together? Did you just like spot like a niche in the market, or was like, no, I just really love doing this and I want to pursue it a bit more?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, actually. I in my undergrad I worked a little bit of baseball, and at the same time it was like, I was about 18, and it was like the formative years of your life, where you're sort of developing. I was never really a good athlete, to be honest. So then when I picked up slow pitch softball, I was just like, oh, like this is something I can be good at, right? And really I just kept playing, fell in love with the sport, just the the simplicity of it, but also like the skill bits, right? Like the nuance and like sort of the attention to detail that you do need. And at the same time, I was doing my degree in kinesiology and athletic therapy. And my first placement was University of Toronto baseball. So it just sort of came together where I'm just like, oh, okay, I'm working a bit of baseball. I'm learning about baseball as well, and I can apply it right away because I'm just like, I myself play this sport, and I can see how, XYZ muscles can, help with XYZ or, common injuries like shoulder injuries, like shin splints, things like that, knee injuries. Um, Kept playing slow pitch, did my other placements, graduated. It was COVID, and I think what ended up happening was I was working in a sport medicine clinic, right? Just seeing in Canada, it's ice hockey, it's
Mhm.
football, as in like soccer, and like a little bit of baseball, right? And I kept getting the clients that were baseball sort of to have me work with because, you just have the popular sports that everyone works with. And I was the only guy that really played any like bat to ball sport.
Okay.
I just ended up loving it, and I'm just like, I think at the end of the day, long story short, I got to this point where I'm just like, hey, I want to help people just like me, right? The rec athlete who, found something that they loved, but, isn't a pro, like isn't thinking of going pro or anything, but just wants to play for as long as possible and loves the community, loves how inclusive it can be, loves how, like how many people you can meet through it. Like I met you, Daryl, just like online. You know what I mean? And I think really that's the biggest thing in terms of that journey coming together to now be like, oh, this is the niche I want to work in. It's just people that play these sports. I don't know if that answers your question, but feel free to ask like a follow-up question or have me elaborate on any of that. Like,
Yeah, no. So like just to kind of touch on it, you mentioned about players that you're basically dealing with rec players. So say like here our amateurs, everyone playing GA is amateur. But and you're talking about that longevity. Do you find it that you get two different types of people where, you have an amateur or, rec player and they want to play and be able to play with longevity, or they're coming and they're trying to play a competitive sport and they're watching almost the professional side of it, like watching, the top class baseball or whatever. They're like, oh, I'm going to go out and try that because my sport is similar to it. Or, like where's the cross between the two, and what's the more difficult athlete to work with?
yeah, man, for me, I honestly don't think there's too much of a difference, right? I think most people do things because, you know, one, they enjoy it,
Mhm.
right? But I think people enjoy it more when they're better at it.
Yeah,
So like
100%.
when they're more competitive or, they can compete, right? And so maybe I've just never met this other type of athlete, but I feel like most people are, enjoy it and also want to get better at it. And I think those aren't mutually exclusive things. I definitely do know some people are more like sort of, I'm just here to socialize. But even those people, I feel like to compete or like will, it feels better to win, and everyone's happier when you win, isn't it? Um, so Yeah, I don't think any of them are more difficult to work with. I think it's just then the way you frame it, right? The way you talk about, hey, why do you want to? So for example, I'm physio and I work with a lot of injuries, right? So like, why do you want to get back to sport? So well, I want to get back to sport because it sucks sitting on the sideline and not being a part of the team, right? Or I want to get back to the sport because then I can get to the next level once I get to this point, right? Once I get healthy again, right? And I think either way, it's like, the actual meat and potatoes of it is the same. Like we're getting you back to the sport, playing, my mission being as better than they were before, but like as well as they can be.
Yeah. It feels like you're reading my mind on some of these things. Wanting to get back on the field because being on the sideline is very hard to watch. Bit of experience with that this year. Um,
I hear you.
but so like I know you mentioned there that you're working with people who want to get better. So sometimes I find they're the minority because
Mm,
now, and you might disagree with me, but I think
mm,
like the majority of my sport, there's a lot of people who want to be better. They don't necessarily
mm.
want to
Yeah.
do the process to get better. They just want to
Uh-huh.
be there.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah, no, I exactly. No, you're right. I think a lot of people want to be better. But I think with anything, like you got to you don't just automatically arrive there, right? Some people look at it and it's like, oh, this guy's just so talented. It's like, well, like they also had to put in the hours. They had to put in the work, right? And you never see that. It's sort of like social media. You always see the result of things. You never see sort of what they put in to get there. So I don't know. I think that's part of just like, hey, how much do you want it?
Yeah, no, and like actually, just when you mention your social media, if you want to give a, if you want to mention how people can find you, you
Oh
want to
yeah.
shout it out.
Yeah, my social media is at wes.second.prime.performance. So Second Prime Performance is my company, and it's my baby. It's my full-time job, and I absolutely love it. I just feel like I'm living the dream when I'm working.
And do you find that like since going into that, like more and more, that your own playing time is kind of suffering, or is it just like no, like your coaching is part and parcel with your playing, and it's kind of nearly melded into one?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And actually, yeah, I think like this year especially, I was like, I'm blessed. I've had some really good opportunities this year. Um, like I'll be straight up, right? I'm probably not the most qualified to have these opportunities, but I was just asked the right questions at the right time. And essentially that really dug into a lot of my playing time that I was able to play this year. My club captain was like asking me like, "Hey, are you going to be doing this much next year? Because like we need someone who's committed and like sort of we want to win the league next year, and it's just like we need a little bit of consistency." And I was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." But yeah, to answer your question, long story short, yes, I think it's dug in a little bit, but I don't know. If it feels like play still a lot of times, even if I'm working. So, I've not felt like I've been away from the sport.
Then that's a win-win for you then, because progressing the career, getting more exposure, getting more opportunities, and you don't feel like you're missing out. So maybe your teammates are cursing you out of it that you that they're suffering, but no, fair play. Like it's fantastic what you've managed to achieve to date. Like so then we'll just circle back to a couple of things you mentioned about injuries, and whatever. So everyone really wants to know like what's the three top things to ensure that they're going to be absolutely perfect, they'll never get injured, and they're going to win all around them. So Wes is going to give you those answers right now. With no, I'm only winding you up. But what
Let
do
me
you
write those
find?
down. What was it? Be never get injured. I've got one
Never
for
get
that.
yeah
Never get
okay.
injured. Okay. What was the second one?
Single answer, like one word answers here now. Uh, I don't know. I was just winding you up with that, but no, like some of the questions I would have like, and because I get these questions and
Mhm.
like I'm not in a position to answer. Like I can only draw on my own knowledge, but like you're literally the professional here. So like, what are the most common injuries that you see in in slow pitch softball? So like rounders is you've seen some of the game footage. It's very similar. Like the actions are similar. The athleticism is probably something similar. So, like I would imagine that most of the injuries are going to cross over. So, like, what are the more, common ones that you come across? And like maybe you could advise people how we can, mitigate that and reduce the risk of it.
Yeah, no. Common injuries, I think, are things like more like the niggly injuries, right? So things like knees, where it's just like, oh, I've got knee pain, like very general knee pain, or things like shoulders, right? So those are the two main areas that I would say are common. Rotator cuff injuries, so like strains, tears, I think that's, if I were to be specific, that's something that's very common, especially since if we're talking about rounders or softball, right? We're throwing overhead, our arms overhead, and like with most overhead sports, it's just not something that you do a lot day to day, right? Like in a lot of sports you're doing things down here. Um Even in basketball, like your arms up overhead for like a moment, right? So you get a lot of rotator cuff injuries, a lot of shoulders, but I think the one that I think people struggle with more, and I could be wrong as well, right? Whoever's listening is the knees, right? There's a lot of stop start in this game. There's a
Mhm.
lot of change of direction where you're trying to react to the ball, or you are sort of generating a lot of power, right? For example, sprinting out of the box, even like slowing down after you hit first base, trying to stop on the base, right? These rapid accelerations and decelerations, and you typically don't do that day to day. So a lot of athletes who don't prepare themselves properly are prone to sort of these injuries you get from deceleration, right? But the thing is, it's a lot of niggly injuries, as in sort of like it kind of bites at you for a little bit and then like might go away, kind of comes back, because like you sort of mentioned, it's not professional sport where we're optimizing our sprint speed, where we're going 100% every time. So you don't get as much of these acute, like, oh, I've torn my ACL injuries as much. I think it has to do with like overuse, or I like to call it like misuse, or just not prepared well for it, right? Where we're just not doing it at a frequency enough where your body can adapt and, get used to accelerating and decelerating as rapidly. I don't know if that answers your question, Daryl.
Yeah, no, like that's like I would always answer with something similar that like because what we're doing like it's trying to go from 0 to 100, which people
Yeah,
are like, okay, yeah, I'm used to that. And it's like, but then you're trying to go from 100 back to zero in a shorter space of time. And it's like, and like that's where things kind of happen. And or like, you have your social player who's like, oh yeah, no, I'm just gonna go. I'm not gonna go too hard. I'm just gonna have a bit of fun. Oh, I hit a ball. I'm going for it.
yeah,
And like, maybe they haven't prepared their bodies for it. So like, you know, one of the things that I always get out, oh, what's the best warm-ups to do? And like over the years, I don't like using the word warm-up because people are like, oh, I'm warm. It's like it doesn't
hmm
really mean a whole lot. Like I was listening to a couple of podcasts, like guys in I think they're California based, Mind Pump, and like they talk about priming the body, priming muscles, and
hmm
it's like that's to me that's a better reflection of it because it's like, oh, I'm going to warm up, I'm going to throw the ball, and they go out and they start throwing the ball. It's like,
yeah,
they're throwing the ball to warm up as opposed to warming up to throw the ball.
yeah, yeah,
And I don't that would be my thoughts on it, but like I'd love to hear, you might tell me that I'm like having a notion what I'm talking about, and to be honest, most people listening to this would probably agree with you.
yeah. No. I completely agree with you. And just to provide a bit of nuance to it, right? Like I would call it like pregame prep, right? And that's like everything from like hydration, even like sports nutrition, like things that I would talk to my athletes about in terms of if I'm traveling with GB baseball, for example, right? A big part of it was, hey, look, I don't get these players for 6 months. I get them for 2 weeks, right? So how can we optimize this time that we're together? It's the pregame prep starts from, hey, this week leading up to like, what are we putting in our bodies, right? Because I think I don't know how old you are, but like, as I feel like I'm getting older, it's just like what you put in your body like really matters, right? And really matters on how you feel physically and even just like mentally. Sometimes just like if you got a little bit of brain fog, it I don't know if I don't know if you can relate to that, but that's how I
Oh,
feel.
100%, yeah.
Right. But yeah, pregame prep. So there's like, all those other things. But when we're talking about the actual, immediately pregame, so like, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes pregame. Um, yeah, I think getting warm is the first step in it. And you hear of like strength coaches and things use like a ramp protocol, right? And the first step is raise your body temperature, which is what we mean by like getting warm. And then we go into activate, mobilize, and then potentiate, right? Which are just words to people. These are just words to people, right? But activate, thinking about like activating certain muscles. Okay, what muscles do I need for throwing? I need my pecs, I need my lats, how can I get my arm in a position and sort of open that up? Mobilize, right? So that's sort of a little bit of your mobility training, right? Oftentimes we injure ourselves when we get to the end range of our motion. Oh, my arm went too far this way, my leg went too far this way, right? So just making sure we're mobilizing. That's sort of the framework we use, right? So these look like your dynamic stretches. I like to use ones that are just can get multiple at the same time, so you're not wasting a lot of time, right? You're not just doing these, right? They call it like the world's greatest stretch, and when you get a little bit of rotation, you get some knees, you get a little bit of everything, right? So there's many ways you can sort of optimize your time spent that way. Because most people want to just show up and just play.
Yeah.
Is it right? And I completely get that. And I think the last one is potentiate. Um, and this is an interesting bit because a lot of people see that pre-game warm-up routine or that this whole ramp routine as injury prevention. Whereas in reality, I think the injury prevention is almost like again I said way before that point in time, right? But in reality, your body won't go 100%, and most of the time injuries happen at 100% unless you warm up properly. So it's sort of like a double-edged sword of warming up properly. You're potentiated as in you are doing things like sprinting in your warm up, where you're activating your nervous system to active, drive your muscles to go 100%. So you'll see a lot of people not get injured even if they don't warm up, which is maybe something cool for your viewers to understand. It's like, oh, I won't get injured if I don't warm up. But I think the main thing is actually they won't perform nearly as good as they can if they don't warm up.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I think matters a little bit more to some people, right? To not let the team down by, hey, I could have made that play. It's like, oh yeah, but I'm just not warm. It's like, oh, okay. I know that definitely did not answer your question that time, but like, that's how I see warm-ups, right? Warm-ups are important to get to your full potential in playing. There's an aspect of, not getting injured as much, but I think a lot of that kind of comes from all the work you do beforehand.
Yeah, no, so like definitely like it goes back to, well, say like in my brain anyway, like that whole, okay, well, your warm is priming yourself to play,
Yeah.
whereas like to me, like injury prevention is, what, how are you fueled, are you fully concentrated, like, again,
Yeah.
sometimes that, like, that mental side of the game,
Hmm.
it's like if you're not fully clued in from the start, like that can lead to injuries because you're not fully paying attention. Then you realize, oh, I'm my gait is half a step off. I'm going to
Yeah.
overstretch to this base here.
Yeah.
That's where I hyperextend my knee or something.
Exactly.
Um, and so like when you're talking about injury prevention, then I assume that with your background, you're kind of talking like resistance type training, and building up that resilience so that, okay, okay, maybe we get hurt if we play at 100%, but if my 100% is only what is my old 80%, or
Mhm.
my, I'm probably saying that backwards, but like if I raise my lower threshold,
Yeah. Your
it's
floor,
like,
isn't it?
yes, if
Yeah.
I raise my floor, that I can play at a higher level without getting injured, and
Mhm.
like, does that come into it, or am I going down the wrong path altogether here?
Yeah, no, I think there. when we're talking about injury prevention, it can be so difficult. And which is funny because I wrote down, you're like, oh, like viewers or listeners, how do you never get injured? And I think that's a very simple
Don't
thing,
play.
and it's to don't play. Like, it's if you sat in your bed all day every day, you would not get injured. It would hurt because you would get bed sores and like, eventually things would suck, but you wouldn't get injured, right? I think it is a part of sport to have injuries, and I think it's just coming back from it the proper way, right? But injury prevention, I think, if I were to sum up my philosophy in a nutshell, would be yes, exactly. Raise your capacity, right? So, you know, be able to play 4 games, be able to sprint 20 times. That way, when you're sprinting 3 times or 4 times in 2 games, it's not gonna, you're gonna be like, I've done this before. I can do this. This is easy. This is like, I'm not at my capacity, right? A lot of injuries happen when you're fatigued. Like you said, when you're not paying attention, which is a big part of it as well, like sort of the whole mental performance, sports psychology side of things, which I absolutely love. But I'm not a professional at that. And
We'll all disagree with you on that one. You are compared to us. So just
and
roll with it.
well, I mean, I want to improve myself in that sense because I think that's that next step in helping people, right? Form the way they can. If I can help them get the physical tools and the mental tools, like, I can be that one-stop shop. But again, I think it's good to know, but also realize where my limits are, right? I've not trained in that. So there's a certain point where I'm like, hey, I think someone else might be better equipped to help you, right? Type of thing with those type of things. Sorry, I'm a little bit off track now.
Yeah, no, you're grand, you're grand. So then, obviously, now I'm going to ask for
We'll
a
go back. We'll go
generic.
back.
I'm going to ask you for a generic answer to a very specific question, and you're going to. I know, like your answer will probably be my favorite answer. Which, whenever anyone asks me something, I'm like, it depends. So, look, in the off season, people are going to look, okay, well, what are a few things that we can do to, to raise our floor, to get a bit better, work on our capacity, make sure that we're less likely to get injured when we go to play. And obviously, it would depend on the team and the player that you're working with. But like if you were to kind of put a generic blanket and say, well, here's a few things that I would recommend that everyone should be able to do to some capacity, what would you go for?
Yeah, yeah. I think first and foremost is like get coaching, right? And I say that because if you're doing something wrong, if you're throwing and your elbow's like down here, or if your mechanics are way off for whatever reason, right? You're not at that 1% better spot in your mechanics, then it won't matter how strong you get. It won't matter how many times you do it. You'd probably still get injured,
Mhm.
right? I think getting really good coaching, learning the skill properly, right? It's been developed over years and years, right? Baseball, softball, a swing, a throw, and they're constantly coming up with new things, but this is a lot of these new things are the 1%, right? There are a lot of there's a lot of ways to do something correctly, right? But you want to make sure you're in that range of ways
Mhm.
before you get to sort of considering some of these other things. I think at the end of the day, it's preparing your body properly and proper body or, strength and conditioning preparation includes, or even proper rehab includes skill, right? The skill things that you're doing, right? So, for example, if it's long toss, that's conditioning for your arm, right? A lot of coaches talk about it as, you know,
And sorry,
throwing
not to
further.
interrupt you there, but just
Yeah, go on.
would you mind just because some people might not be familiar with the terminology, like so long toss, we're just basically throwing for distance.
Yeah, yeah. So long
So
tosses. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Long
sorry, no, it's
toss.
just because some people might not be
Yeah,
as familiar with the terminology.
absolutely. No, good call on that. I think long toss, something like where you're throwing to your partner, playing catch essentially. And then you just go and you just keep going further and further until you can't play catch anymore. Um, is something that coaches often use to increase arm strength. But at the same time, it's something that needs to be either incorporated in your rehab or incorporated in your strength and conditioning program if you do want to throw harder. It doesn't matter how strong your muscles are if you're not actually doing the thing that matters, which is throwing, right? And I think in general, good health helps with sort of preventing injuries as well, right? You can see when someone's not had a good day, their posture on the field, even, and that leads to sort of sloppy errors, and it could lead to a ball in the face, like a bad hop, which are true, but like you can see how if they've not, approached taking care of their own health, mental health, physical health, um, social health, then it can really affect them as well, right? I think from my silo of, physical health, I think a really generic gym program sometimes will do a lot of people good, right? A lot of my clients are on an off-season program right now, but we don't stray too far away from classic things like squats, deadlifts, bench press, rows, right? There's nothing special, I think, with a lot of the training. It's, hey, can we build strong legs? Can we build strong upper body? Can we build a strong core? Right? And then a lot of the skill work you do kind of takes care of the rest in terms of specific conditioning.
Yeah, like I suppose if you don't have a strong trunk, your stability isn't going to be there. So if you go to throw the ball, they're trying to throw it harder, you end up flaying all over the place because something is off. So then you
Yeah.
might need to like kind of dial it back a bit and go, okay, well, if I'm trying to throw it as hard as I possibly can, it's like, well,
Hmm.
something's going wrong. It's either A, my technique, or something like my building blocks aren't right to allow me to do that.
Hmm. Absolutely. And then your coach would be like, hey, like, can you do this? Can you try to do this? And it comes to a certain point where it's just like, maybe they just don't have the strength to do it, right? I see it a little bit more in sort of recreational slow pitch softball with some of the ladies just not being able to swing the bat properly. And it's like, yeah, like, there's fundamentals, but also maybe they're actually just don't have a little bit of the strength that they need, right?
Mhm.
To really drive that bat.
Okay, so that brings me to a very exciting part where I'm going to ask you, when it comes to like swings and that. So like, again, one of the questions I get asked an awful lot is like, oh, am I better using a lighter bat or a heavier bat, or should I train with a heavier bat than what I use? Because then if I'm swinging a heavier one and then I go in and face live pitching, then it's going to feel way lighter using a lighter bat, and or I'm going to go up and swing two or three bats, and then. So what's your views on all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, yeah.
I
I
know
think
I
there's
know
a
my own, and I might disagree with you, but
yeah,
I'll
and
take yours as gospel.
I'll go back, and it depends, right?
Always.
Um, I think it really depends. I think if I were to loop in something I talked about earlier, which was potentiate, right? You'll see a lot of even pro players, right, have a bat weight where they swing two bats as their warm up, and that's potentiating their swing in terms of, hey, can I generate more force? Because a little bit heavier is going to make you like almost make you put a little bit more force, get a little bit more power in it, right? And then when you go in and swing that lighter bat, when you're actually going for your bat, then it feels a little bit lighter, right? So that is different than training with a heavier bat or training with if you're talking about throwing like weighted balls. So these are like plyometric 1 to 2 kilo balls that like a lot of pitchers in baseball would throw with, right? I think personally, again, there's a time and a place, but a lot of people haven't built or just don't have the level of physical proficiency to have earned the right to be training like that, right? There are a lot of lower hanging fruit in terms of physical preparedness that they need to be addressing before they get to that point. I think most of the time it's about what bat you're comfortable swinging with. You could do like I could go really nerdy with this, and if you slap on a bat sensor, which I use with some of my clients, what do you get the most bat speed with, right? If you go from a slow pitch softball bat that's, you know, 26 ounces to 27 ounces to 28 ounces, right? If 26 to 27, you've got the same bat speed, stick with the 27. But if you go to 27, 28 and you've dropped some bat speed, maybe that's what you want, right? But a lot of times if it's drastically dropped, that's when I'd be like, hey, maybe that bat that you were using before, the 27, might be better for you because now you're losing a lot of bat speed for, just a little bit more oomph in your swing. All right. What do you think though? Give me tell
Well,
me
like
your opinion.
my thoughts on it is like, so long as you're doing everything with intent, it has a place. So like I see some people and they'll pick up, they'll swing with two bats, but
Mhm.
they'll kind of like just casually throw them from
Yeah.
side to side. It's like, no,
Hmm.
you're not actually like I would think you need to keep your technique as similar
Yeah.
as possible. So it's like,
Yeah.
you know, again, every time you swing, every time you're doing a practice swing, it needs to be as if you're going to hit the ball, not
Hmm.
just like going through the motions or, you know, I'm going to pick up. Sometimes I see it with the kids, and it's kind of hard to give out. They'll see someone pick up two bats and swing them. I'm going to pick up four, and like the bats throw them across instead of the other way around.
Yeah.
So like, I'd always be like, well, it's so long as it's with intent, and like on the different weights of bats, I'd say like, train with the one that you're going to use as much as you
Yeah.
can, because
Mhm.
you mentioned like it's whatever one you're comfortable with. It's like if you're not training with the one you're going to use, you're not going to be overly comfortable with it. Something's
Yeah.
going to throw you off on the day, because like, you need to have your side of it as dialed in as possible, because the pitcher's going to try and put you off no
Hmm.
matter how good, and how perfect, if I swing, this is what happened. They're going to try and throw something at you to put you off. So
Exactly.
you need to have your bit dialed in. But
Yeah.
that would be my thoughts on it. But like,
Yeah.
what I
And you,
know.
you have to just think about like, oh, like you don't want to be thinking about it on that day of. You don't want to be thinking about, oh, this is a heavier bat, so I need to swing a little bit earlier. Like, you don't want that. So yeah, I completely agree with you. You should train with the bat that you're gonna swing. And yeah, 100% with the intent as well. I think, people are swinging, you know, with the bat weight and they're just kind of going through the motions of it. That doesn't potentiate because that doesn't, if I were to go a little bit nerdy real quick, is
Go for it.
it's um it's your motor neurons, it's your sort of your brain telling your muscles, right? That gives you that potentiation effect, right? And when it's heavier, your brain tells your muscles to contract harder and faster. And that's what gives you that potentiation effect. So when you pick up the light one, your brain still thinks it's heavy and you can kind of rip through at that point.
Mhm.
And that's where you get that potentiation effect. So if you're not trading with intent, in terms of if you don't, potentiate properly, if you don't swing that heavier bat or two bats harder and in the proper way, then there's no point in doing it at all,
Yeah.
almost.
Yeah. No, no, it makes perfect sense. Like, so then just on a couple of injuries. So I asked a couple of people, oh, could you send in a few things, and that you'd like asked, just like on, like, not quick fixes, but here's a few exercises that will help alleviate certain injuries or whatever. So like kind of, the first one that come up was, hamstring twinges.
Hmm.
So we'll go through them one by one, if that's all
Yeah,
right, rather than me giving you a list and then.
I'll give you so again, it depends, but I think this is something I am passionate about in terms of like, hey, the exercises that are going to best prepare you and sort of get you most prepared for the sport are going to be the ones that are also the most injurious, the ones that are most dangerous, because your body needs that stimulus so it knows that it has to keep up with it.
Mhm.
So for hamstrings, it's sprinting, right? It is the absolute best exercise for developing strong, resilient hamstrings for more sprinting. And I think that's what a lot of people are missing in their off-season programming. They don't sprint for 4 or 5 months, and they get back to the diamond. They're like, I'm gonna warm up properly. So then you've had this extra layer of, hey, I'm going to be able to sprint pretty quick now because I've warmed up properly. And then they go and they strain their hamstring on the first sprint, right? And it's because they haven't really sprinted all of the off season, all 4 or 5 months. Um, in terms of actual like rehab exercise, let's say if you just twinge your hamstring, right? It's just going to be, hey, can I load this hamstring slowly first? So things like hamstring curls, things like Romanian deadlifts, things like there's one that's like Nordics and that became really popular. It's the one where you're like lying down. that became really popular in sort of football, and sort of the injury prevention program that FIFA's rolled out. But it still doesn't compare to the injury prevention um, effects of sprinting on a regular basis. So I hope that gives you a sort of broad overview of how you might be able to handle your hamstring there.
Yeah, well, like sure, it goes back to like what you said near the start, where you've got the skill of it too. So it's like there's a skill of sprinting. So
Mhm.
as you could have the strongest, like your hamstrings are able to move this amount of weight. It's like, but if your sprinting technique is off, you can still do whatever.
Yeah.
Then so next one is rotator cuff. So
Yeah.
like I always tell people fill up a small bottle of water, but maybe you'll have something a bit more scientific or a bit better for them than that.
Yeah. And I think I would use the same framework, right? So, hey, if it's a fresh injury, right, you might need to load it slowly. You might need to just desensitize the area, right? You might need to get those specific tissues strong again. So, for example, there's four rotator cuffs. In general, they do internal rotation, external rotation, right? I would just, hey, maybe I need to get strong in external rotation again. So sort of rotating up and out, right? Maybe I would do that starting from my waist side. Maybe it's just from here,
Hmm.
right? And then getting into more sport specific things, right? But you want to build the strength first. Also, general upper body movements. So things like bench press, things like rows, things like lat pull downs, things like shoulder press, right? So we're doing our push pull up and down, push pulls forward and back. These things also activate that rotator cuff to a high degree, right? So you'll find when people have rotator cuff injuries, it's so painful because rotator cuff is involved in every single move, like almost all movements. They'll be like, oh, like, I can't really tell you when it hurts because it hurts when I do a lot of things. And the reason is because the rotator cuff is designed to do that. It's designed to be activated every time you're moving. So a lot of these bigger compound movements can also be part of that rehab in terms of your rotator cuff. I would say specifically things that people tend to miss are rows. So that's sort of horizontal rows or like pull downs, things where we're working the posterior part of our shoulder and our back, right? These are the things that are decelerating when we're throwing, especially for athletes who throw a lot. These are the muscles that help slow your arm down and tend to take the wear and tear of throwing.
Hmm.
Again, back to sort of the skill part of things, we also need to be the throwing needs to be part of your rehab as well. It needs to be layered in, right? Maybe it's slower throwing. Maybe it's not throwing as far um, as the introduction back into throwing, right? But either way, if your sport involves throwing, you need to be eventually progressing to throwing, right? Which is a much higher speed contraction when we're talking about the muscles and the tendons there. I hope that gives a little bit of a framework, and I haven't bored your socks off yet with
Yeah,
the.
no, well, I find it all very fascinating, and hopefully everyone else listening does too. So then, continuing on like the common injuries that I asked people is like, the next one though was plantar fasciitis and how to manage it and reduce it happening. I wouldn't have
Mhm.
considered this as common, but this is what came back.
Yeah. So plantar fasciitis is another sort of, we call it like overuse injury or typically classified as overuse, right? There are plantar fascia strains, but those aren't as common as sort of the itis that you've talked about, which sort of alludes to an element of chronicity. So like it's sort of built up and it's sort of peaked at a certain time where you're finally starting to notice it. The bottom of your foot is sort of connected to that calf complex. So oftentimes when we're approaching rehab, it starts from that calf complex and making sure that's strong as well, right? Because that goes down and supports the foot. You might include some sort of foot intrinsic exercises. You might look at the mobility as well, right? So some people just naturally have higher arches or sort of lower arches, and that can lend to sort of particular footwear not being ideal for them as well, right? That's one of the things I'd look at. But in general, it seems simple, but it's strengthening that whole calf complex. I think where a lot of rehab professionals, you know, end is they just strengthen it and they don't prepare it. I keep going back to this, but they don't prepare it for the sport, right? So it involves running, involves sprinting, right? So these are the things that you need to be doing to rehab plantar fasciitis. There are certain techniques that you can do on the sideline that can sort of provide temporary relief or sort of give it a little bit more support. And I often suggest that people do get like an insole. Doesn't have to be like the 300 euro ones that you get from like the fancy foot doctor. Most of the time, like the 40 euro one that you get from the store will be enough in terms of providing just that extra little bit of support while you sort of let those tissues settle down, right? The most important thing is those inserts having a heel cup, which controls your heel from excessive pronation or supination, which is just words that basically means excessive movement in the foot, right? Um, yeah, I think that's sort of that framework that I would go along, and then making sure they are getting back to running and or whatever irritable activity that initially sort of set it off.
Okay, no, I would have never realized that it was linked to the calf. So the last common injury that came back to me, sorry, I'm gonna have to read this out because
Yeah, go on.
it's very, very common. So can you recommend exercises that can be done at home for bilateral patellar tendinopathy, and what recommendations you'd have for the treatment of a meniscal tear? So
Yeah,
again,
yeah.
common injuries.
Yeah, we'll go. So those are two different conditions. We'll go with the patellar tendinopathy first, and that's sort of what I was talking about with the knees.
Mhm.
Oftentimes, like the knees are used to generating force, but not as used to sort of absorbing or decelerating. And oftentimes, you'll feel that as you're slowing down or as you're coming to a stop, especially those tendons, or even if it's going downstairs, because that's decelerating, slowing yourself down, that you'll find a lot of these patellar tendinopathies tend to be irritable, right? In general, right? Depends, again, depends, but
The
depends on
best
what
answer
stage you're
ever.
on, right? Depends on what stage you're on. Oftentimes, a good entry point is isometrics. So things like, when you're in grade school and your PE teacher made you do wall sits. Yeah, that is honestly somewhere I would start with a lot of these like tendon issues, right? It's just being able to introduce load to the tendons without it flaring up, right? And oftentimes it flares up with really dynamic loads. So if you're trying to load and explode, if you're trying to jump, um, and just do quick things. But oftentimes slow control is a good entry point to sort of building tendon resilience and also strengthening some of those muscles around it. And then again, then have to progress it, but maybe in a smart way. Maybe you just do the exploding portion first, right?
Mhm.
We call it the stretch shortening cycle, which is how a lot of plyometric and sort of dynamic movements are done, where there's like a stretch, and then there's almost like this short plyometric phase where nothing happens, and then there's an explode, right? If you're thinking about a throw, it's pull and then throw, right? So maybe it's breaking down the phases of that, oftentimes with tendon issues that tend to take a long time to resolve,
Mhm.
right? Tendon issues, if I were just to give just a quick overview again, it takes around minimum of 3 months to 6 months to really completely resolve these issues because they're just so annoying. But a lot of people feel like they came out of nowhere, but in reality, most tendon issues come from a long time of ill preparation. Could be years type of thing. And second one was meniscus, was it? You're
Yeah,
saying?
meniscal tear.
Yes. So yes, meniscus tear. Um, it's interesting because most time they're not going to do surgery for meniscus tears, right? Unless there's a particular type of meniscal tear where your knees catching or locking. And the reason is because meniscus, it just doesn't, it's just a piece of cartilage.
Mm.
And it can be really annoying because it can get entrapped, it can become inflamed. But most of it is just based on your symptoms, you would rehab that, right? And the main thing that I see with meniscal tears is that people stop doing everything. Your knee, or sort of the muscles around your knee, get weak from you not loading it, you not walking on it even, or you not putting weight on it, and everything sort of then gets tired, essentially, because it's getting weaker. You see visible muscle loss oftentimes. So the main thing is it's a piece of cartilage. It doesn't matter how much you load it. It's not really gonna adapt because it's almost like not living to it is, but it's not, right? There's not a lot of blood flow through it. Um, Essentially, it's just managing those symptoms, but also developing strong muscles around it because it's designed to support your knee and give it a little bit more stability. If you can create stability with, developing the muscles around it,
Yep.
oftentimes it doesn't need to put as much pressure onto those meniscus. It doesn't sort of need the meniscus to be as strong. And you can just crack on pretty much.
Okay. So like basically like if someone is they that happens to them and they get like sometimes they'll get an injection in to like reduce the swelling or
hmm
whatever. It's like so you're saying that that's an option, but if you do that and then don't work the muscles around it, you're just going to end up back in the same spot.
Yeah. Or even worse, right? I think the funny you talk about injections. Some people are really against it, but I think it's just like, hey, if it's something that can, help with your pain for a little bit so that you can keep moving and not have the muscle wastage people typically do with knee injuries. You can see it. It's very visible. Like one quad's huge and the other one's just like it just looks skinny. Um, then yeah, I think it's absolutely fine to have an injection and then just being able to crack on and develop those muscles and continue to strengthen everything around it.
Okay, cool. No, thanks a million for that. So,
Yeah.
um, the last little bit, I'll kind of like cut it there, and we'll do like an outro as well. But
Go on.
so I want to do like a little mini clip. So I'm just gonna call out a couple of like training aids or physio type aids that a
Yeah.
lot of like amateur players would think, oh, this is good or this is not good. And it just, if you wouldn't mind rating them like kind of 1 to 10, 10 being they're really good and worth getting or worth using or implementing, and one being they're terrible. So, first one would be like resistance bands.
Resistance bands. 6. 6. I think it really depends on where you're at and what you're using them for, right? A lot of people don't have access to a gym, so resistance bands are a way that you can introduce resistance training into your program and also, target certain muscles because oftentimes muscles can be difficult to target if you're not in a gym setting, right? So having them on the sidelines, resistance bands are great.
Yeah. Okay. So having a niggly injury and just saying, oh, I'll be fine. I'll go and get a sports massage or I'll get it rubbed out.
I'm gonna say a 2 with that one. And you know me, but 2 because it's not terrible. Um, it's not a 0. It's a 2 because I think it's not really addressing why we have this niggle and this injury, right? It covers it up a little bit, and it can get you through a game or a tournament, but oftentimes it might just come back worse.
Mhm. Okay. Taking caffeine or an energy drink before a game.
Ooh, I'm gonna give that an 8. I think I wouldn't give it a 10 because some people don't like to be overstimulated. I'm one of those people that I cannot hit a ball if I'm sort of too amped up. Um, but caffeine has been shown to improve athletic performance, so it's definitely something that can be useful as long as it's not like an evening game and it's 8 p.m. and it's going to be keeping you up and disturbing your sleep.
If it gets the team a win, we don't care if it keeps them up all night. So then the next one. So like keno tape.
Like K-tape.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ooh, that's like a
Depends is not an acceptable answer here.
3. K-tape gives you proprioception, but doesn't support injuries, right? Proprioception means it just gives you an awareness of it. So you can slap masking tape and it might have a very similar effect.
Yeah, makes sense. I then like joint braces, so like a knee brace, an elbow brace, or an ankle brace.
7, very good way to get an athlete to build confidence while lowering their injury risk, but can be detrimental to them if they rely on it.
Mm-hmm. So kind of like short term versus long term.
Yeah, I think it's really good to use during the rehab process, especially when we're trying to get back into sport. But when people use it as a crutch and can't play without it, that's when it becomes an issue, right? Oftentimes I use it as part of the rehab process, and then we have a weaning off process as well.
So and then last two here. So sleep.
Oh, that's a 10 out of 10 all the way. Um, Sleep is just so highly underrated. Um, it's one of the most important sort of performing enhancing sort of things that you can do. Sleep is just good for your health overall and also your performance, right? It affects your testosterone, it affects your hormones, it affects sort of, you know, your mood, even like, how you engage with your teammates. It's just one of the most important things. And the funny thing is, nobody knows why.
So and then the very last one I have is cold stretching. So just stretching muscles, just standing there stretching.
Like, so
Like
static stretching. Yeah.
static stretching, but like not having raised your body temperature before. Just like, oh no, I'll not do the run and I'll just stretch my muscles here.
That's probably like a 3. Like it's not very effective. You're not really gonna get a whole ton of improved range of motion, especially if you don't have any sort of body temperature. Um, and any improvements you do get are very temporary and wouldn't really make a difference.
Great. Okay. So then I'm just going to do like a bit of an outro, just kind of say like thanks for coming on and get you to plug you know your your socials again, and then I can stop the recording. So that all right with you, or is there anything
Yeah.
else you want to put in?
No, I think that's it. That's
Okay,
that's me.
I'll go for that. So I just want to say thanks a million for coming on and educating us on all those things and telling me how wrong I was in most of it as well. But
You
if
weren't
you
wrong
want to
at
just
all.
if you want to just give a shout out to if people want to find more stuff or want to follow you to you know have a look at some of the stuff that you're putting out there. Just want to give it one more shout.
Yeah. So I can be found on Instagram. That's generally where I do a lot of my content, right? I'm also on Facebook, but you can just get into the group by messaging me on Instagram at wes.secondprimeperformance. So there's a period between each of those words, but wes.second.prime.performance. Find me there or just ask Daryl.
Yeah. No, we'll put it in the description of the video as well, anyway, so for anyone that wants to find you. But yeah, thanks a million, Wes. Really
No,
appreciate you
thank
coming
you,
on.
Daryl. No, this is fun, man.